Hi everybody, hello and welcome. I hope you guys are all doing very well. I got the AC running over there, so sorry it's going to be a bit of a loud video. But I wanted to talk about sneezeweeds. So this is Helenium or Helenium, named after Helen of Troy, also known as the sneezeweed. So this particular plant here is a cultivar of Helenium autumnale, which is probably the most commonly cultivated Helenium. But it's in the Asteraceae family, which means that it has an aster-formed flower, meaning that it has disc florets and ray florets, kind of like a capitulous daisy. So Helenium or Helenium is a hardy perennial plant, hardy to USDA zone 5, I believe, really depending on the variety, and there's so many different species. So these are grassland kind of prairie plants that are native to the Americas, more specifically a large part of Canada and the United States, especially in the central prairies and bogs and areas that retain moisture, and all the way down into Mexico and even Central America, all the way down into like almost Costa Rica. So Helenium or Helenium, also known as sneezeweed, was named as such because people used to make infusions and like vapors and snuff out of the dried leaves, and they used to inhale it and it would make them sneeze vigorously. So the thought process behind that was that if the person were to sneeze and vacate their sinuses, they would essentially vacate their bodies of any, like, maladies, any evil spirits, any possessions that they might have. So definitely a weird history of this plant, but if you were wondering why it's called sneezeweed, that's why. So sneezeweeds are actually not incredibly heavy pollen, producers. Some people will get a little bit of an allergic reaction to them, but in general, they're not like a Gaillardia or like a blanket flower where, a lot of people will be experiencing allergic symptoms to them. So this is what the new flowers look like when they're coming out. So you don't want to cut those off. That's your upcoming flowers. I call this like phase 1. And then you have these ones. They look really kind of, happy and joyful. They look almost like they got little claws coming up. That's the next phase. And then they get into full flower. So they'll be in full flower for, I want to say 3-4 days per individual flower on the autumnale Helenium. This is Helenium autumnale. It's a hybrid of some sort, or a cultivar of some sort. And then they start to kind of reflex their petals downwards like this. This means that the flower's about faded, and then you can proceed to deadhead them. Now you can let Helenium go to seed, but I recommend deadheading them because you get a much bigger show, and then you're going to get more divisions on the bottom as the plant progresses. So these guys are susceptible to some powdery mildew. That's one thing I will say. If you have a wet climate, you can expect a little bit of powdery mildew, but you can always just prune it off, or you do any antifungal treatment that you otherwise would. You'll get a little bit of yellow on the bottoms when they get into bloom. I think that this is mainly just a seasonal thing. It's happened on virtually every Helenium I've ever seen, unless maybe I'm just lucky and I see yellow-leaved Heleniums, I'm not sure, but that is very normal. If you cut these back and you do what's called like a Chelsea chop, which is when they're about to finish blooming, you cut them about half. You might get a second flush a little bit later into late September, early October, but it really depends on if you have a longer summer. If it starts to get into cool autumnal days, you might just end up with a chopped up plant. So it might not be for everybody, but just want to, kind of let you that that's an option. So sneezeweeds or heleniums come in different heights. A lot of the autumnale cultivars are approximately 3.5, sometimes even 4 feet in height. But there's stouter varieties that are 1 to 2 feet in height, and they're always going to have a similar spread. So they're not like invasive, but they do form large clumps, is one thing I will say. Very reminiscent of like an echinacea, for example. They get that kind of mounding form. They look really good in mixed containers. I have it with Coreopsis and Sweet William dianthus here. They're fibrously rooted, so they don't have a rhizome or a taproot, which makes them easy to move. I would recommend dividing them every 3-4 years. Full sun. So this is a weird plant in that it really loves boggy conditions, which include like full sun and moisture retentive soil. So sneezeweeds do not like to dry out at all, but they need full sun to bloom well. So what I would really recommend is growing them in a medium that really retains water in a sunny location, especially if they're in containers, because containers have a proclivity for drying out a lot. You'll get the best color and you'll get the longest bloom time. So I'm in zone 8A if we're going by the USDA zone convention here in southern British Columbia. So for me, they bloom late August all the way through September. If you're in northern and colder climates such as Minnesota, North Dakota, the prairies, you'll expect blooms a little bit later, and it's a little bit more brief, I find. If you're in more southern zones, this can grow even as far down as like zone 10. Actually, there's even a variety that's native to Louisiana that does really, really well in high humidity. You can see blooms a little bit earlier and a little later. It's a bit of a longer bloom time. Helenium, I'll show you how I would deadhead this. You can pinch them back with your hands or like, sanitized shears or whatever. I would go back to a true leaf, this one here for example, and just pinch it back. There you go, you got your little Helenium kind of flower. And I would go through all of this. Remember, be mindful not to get rid of, your new flowers, because that's your next generation of flowers. The seed heads, they produce achenes, so much like a gerbera daisy, you'll notice that they have these really cool, kind of insignificant disc floret seeds that come out, and they're quite viable. Germination usually takes place in about 20 days or so, really depending on the climate in which you're growing them. I let them self-seed and drop their seed in the fall. I find that they're most keen to overwintering, and then they kind of shoot up in the early spring. One thing I will say, oh, my camera's not in focus. Whoops. Helenium does get better over time. It's a reliable, long-lived perennial, but I find that it has 5-year cycles. It'll look really good the second, third, fourth year. 5th year, they tend to kind of diminish, and then you kind of have to replenish them or divide and kind of, get new starts in your soil. Now, I recommend putting steer manure is a good one just for the moisture retentive qualities and like the soil structural integrity qualities. Steer manure is good for these guys. Mushroom manure too, because it has a really high, water retention capacity compared to like bark mulch, for example. It likes pretty neutral soils. And yeah, beautiful cultivars to try out. I really do recommend this plant. I'm not a super tall guy, but you can see like this is, they have a little bit of height to them. Like they're really showy in the garden. So that is Helenium or Helenium. You might have problems later on in the year with caterpillars. Caterpillars go crazy over them. They're relatively deer resistant, relatively rabbit resistant, but if food is scarce, they will come after them too. Yeah, they bloom in unison kind of with like nemesias and asters and calendulas and stuff. So it's a time of the year where you get a lot of, really diverse form in flowers in the garden, which is very important. So I really hope that you guys try these out, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you guys all stay blessed. Have a good one.